Ms. Watt, are you prepared to proceed with opening argument on behalf of the defendant?
Yes, Your Honor.
Actually, I think I said closing argument. Go
Yes.
ahead. Go ahead.
May it please the court, counsel, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. I hope it surprises no one, since I've been doing it consistently, but I will talk less. And I would hope that nobody will judge the strength or weakness of the case just because I say fewer words. I want to go through some of the testimony that we heard and some of the things to take away from it in our view. Detective Fangman, I agree with the state that his video is important because it shows us some things. It shows us the layout of this home. And no, we're not obsessed about this demonstrative exhibit. It's just wrong. Because the state spent a lot of time talking about how Houston would have had to sneak through this hallway that's right next to the bedroom door, so somebody would have had to hear him. That's why it matters that that is misleading, because it's a whole room. And there was more room for him to go through that unnoticed. We also see ransom on video. And anything I say, you should always defer to your own recollection, of course, and your own notes and what you heard in the evidence. No attempts to mislead from either side. We see ransom on that video when Detective Fangman walks in. He's just laying there on the floor in the middle of the living room. And when he sees the officer, he gets up. There's been a lot of talk or speculation that ransom had to have been barking at somebody. He had to have attacked somebody. But it doesn't appear to be the case if he's literally laying on the floor as Karina is screaming bloody murder. And even with what's going on with the children and with Ryan, he remains laying on the living room floor. A little nitpicky, but we did hear from, I think it was Gladfelter, that the wallet that was on the end table, it was never moved, as if he would know that. If you watch the video, there's no wallet on the end table. The video also shows the movements of the EMS personnel. And that's kind of important because we link it to Ken Martin's testimony, and we see on the video that EMS steps behind the chair to get to Ryan and goes around so they don't step in the blood. That's why we don't have their footprints. It's not because that entire pool is dry, it's because they don't step in it. The video is also important because it shows the state of Karina, and it is your job to decide the credibility and whether this is hysteria or whether this is true panic. We heard from Cade Cooper that Ransom was a normal dog, which is consistent with what we see on Fangman's video. We heard that his room had been newly remodeled. We didn't hear anything that made it appear like he was suspicious of being told to sleep in his room. He said he woke up to his mom screaming. This is interesting because everyone is saying how loud this had to have been. These gunshots had to be so loud, and there were 2 of them. But nobody testifies to having heard a gunshot. Cade confirms that his mom is running back and forth between the bedroom and the living room. We don't know exactly what time Cade got up, of course, in this minutes of span of when Karina is making all these steps. We have our only basis of a timeline is the fact that we know there must have been enough time for him to go and slip and leave footprints behind. But he confirms that his mom was running all over the place, freaking out. Cade didn't make it sound like Ryan and Karina fought a whole lot. We've heard testimony from some of the friends that Karina would be pretty mean sometimes. We didn't hear from Cade that they spent all their time arguing, though. Also didn't hear any conflicting testimony from Cade about the sleeping habits of his dad, or whether he actually does or doesn't get up in the middle of the night. Andrew Gladfelter, we see the pictures that they take. We see this showcasing that is left by the front door. cannot tell by looking at Detective Fangman's video or any body cam, cannot tell whether that shell casing is visible on that floor at that time. It is certainly possible that somebody kicked it to get it to that final place. Or it's possible that's just where it landed, certainly. But we also know from the pictures that there is a vent nearby. And we know from the pictures that these things are small. And Andrew Gladfelter did testify that they didn't look within the ductwork to find those things. If you've ever dropped something down a vent, sometimes it goes further than just the very top. The photos do confirm that this house was in a state of remodeling. He tells us that at least this front door was locked. And a point on the locked doors, this is the country, right? This isn't Cedar Rapids. This is the country. This is rural country. A lot of people don't lock their doors at night. Aaron Cooper couldn't tell us whether Ryan and Karina normally lock their doors. The state wants to contend that this is such a secure place because of the existence of keypads. But nobody has confirmed, yes, they always lock their doors. They did appear to have keypads in places where all the toys were housed. Tiffany Lord, she testified that there are millions of artifacts on these phones. Millions. That's a lot. There are a lot of data points on phones. You saw a handful. You saw some gaps in search history. She picked out one. There were others. We saw some Google searches that Houston made. The best she could find for Karina is a hunter education course. She can't explain the gaps in the Snapchat messages because in Defendant's Exhibit A alone, we know it's just not possible. These are all the snaps between these two people. And when she was testifying, I put up on the screen the series of the Biome app intents that she did later testify about yesterday. There's a lot of messages happening, a lot. And she can't tell us why we get messages, let's say June 13th, why those are able to be retrieved, but then there's missing ones in the middle. She can't answer that. She can't say it's because these were deleted specifically. She can't say because whether it was Snapchat that did it on its own, and that's because Snapchat, that type of software is proprietary. And that's what Chris Lyon was kind of explaining. It's because Apple doesn't want you to be able to get into the person's phone. Facebook wants to pretend their stuff is encrypted. These applications don't want to help police get into phones. And so that's what he was saying when police, it's essentially a hack. This software is them kind of getting them through the back door and being able to expose some information. But they can't figure everything out. So that's why we don't know why we have messages June 13th and then nothing until June 17th, and then seemingly a gap in the conversation leading into June 18th. We did ask her, can you explain why some of these numbers look sequential for the Snapchat? She didn't know. She didn't say that they're not. She didn't say that we're wrong about reading the way we're reading a database. She also came back and testified yesterday that there's a Biome app intent at 4:20 in the morning. But there's no message there, and you cannot answer how that's data loss. That is simply data loss. That's what it is. This might be hard to see, but this is Defendant Exhibit J, I believe. No. It's, in any event. Look at the middle. Those numbers are going in order. That's what Chris Lyon meant when he said, I know how to read a database. I have training in a database. Because you can also use your common sense to interpret information. Those numbers are in order. Otherwise, I guess it's just a coincidence that all those numbers are in order. And obviously, above the blue line, we have a gap in the numbers because there's a gap in time. And there are other messages in between that time that don't get retrieved. The state asked Chris Lyon, and Chris Lyon, I think, volunteered, that basically the data gets retrieved off the phone. And then what happens is we use this software to be able to review the data on the phone. Because otherwise you have a bunch of raw data. And Chris Lyon said he did not compare this information on the software to the raw data. That's what he means when he says he didn't test it. I could be wrong. I never heard Tiffany Lord say she tested the phone raw data against the information she was providing to either. Coming up here and saying it's impossible and sounding confident doing it doesn't mean you're right. We heard from Carmen, I think it's Earhart, and Kirsty Shetta. They never saw Karina be physically violent to Ryan. I think it was Carmen who testified about Karina leaving some groups, kind of a tangential point, but we did hear from Holly Witt that she was still in this group that Carmen is describing. You can also surmise that you could confirm that that is true, because on Defendant's exhibit with the Snapchat picture, you see somebody talking about being in Dallas. And who do we know is in Dallas? The state also talks about how everybody is like covering their location and everything and taking all these efforts to conceal a crime. We have lots of data points for Karina's geolocation from Snapchat. We only have a couple for Houston. I submit to you that that's because her location is on. People come and testify now after the fact with this information, and they're looking at Karina and her behavior through a different lens. They were her friends. And it's easy to look back sometimes and be like, gosh, this must have meant that, gosh, this must have meant that. That's just you trying to answer questions in your own head. I say the same of Teresa McBride and Brian Morrison, because Teresa McBride even testified to it, that she has gone back over time and tried to figure out what she missed. And that's why we have, them coming years later and telling the police one time in either 2018 or 2020, she said she would shoot him in the face. She had testified at her deposition. She was asked about that the behavior she saw between Ryan and Karina was nothing outside the norm of what couples do. She testified before you that Karina is probably just harsher than Teresa may be, but it wasn't something that appeared to give her much concern at the time. It's clear that both Teresa and Brian did love both these people. We heard some talk from Brian about statements about documents. Unclear what that was necessarily about from the testimony, but it certainly was nothing like, if something happens to me, look to Karina. It could have been just a reasonable discussion between two friends. I mean, it's reasonable to think somebody would tell their friends where their stuff is in case of an accident or something. Brad Rund and Jeff Gudenkoff gave us some information. Brad said she overdrafted, and she did overdraft a lot. Jeff Gudenkoff, he showed us the policies. They were gotten in, I believe, 2013. And didn't hear any evidence that at any point Ryan Cooper attempted to change the beneficiary. Ken Martin. He was on the stand for quite a while. He had a lot to say, and we learned a lot about blood spatter. And he agrees that Fangman's video is important because that's the closest we're going to get to the pristine scene. Okay? What's also important in that is you can see, and I think there was a screenshot provided of it, you can see that Karina is on top of Ryan. The state has continuously argued that she's rubbing her face all over him. That's not apparent to be the case on any of these videos. That is suggestion by the state. Ken Martin described it more as she was on him embracing him. What is noteworthy is that she has no blood on her legs or her feet. The way that Ken Martin testified would suggest that if she was nearby when Ryan gets shot, she's going to have spatter on her. If she's hanging around looking for shell casings, she's going to have spatter on her. That blood spatter went everywhere. And he said that the blood spatter in the pool could have formed very quickly. The state wants to say it was some time. It's unclear what timeline they want to have here because making it sound like the murder must have happened at 4:23 because that's when she's up and around. But then what takes Houston 50 minutes to get there? In any event, what we know from Ken Martin is that blood can pool the way that we see here, either very quickly or very slowly. It can dry either very quickly or very slowly, depending on all the environmental factors and air and humidity. Based on his testimony, it appears to be possible that Houston would have time to come in, shoot Ryan twice in the face, get blood spatter on his shoe, leave his shoe print as exiting the front door. Everybody agrees that's Houston's footprint. It's his shoe print. I apologize. It's his shoe print in that house. That's Houston's. The footprint, the bare footprints, we can't match because of insufficient quality of the photographs. So we don't know whether those are Cade's footprints. Ken Martin also testified, we understand that Ryan would have been in one position for what I'll call the first pool to form, and then he had to have been shifted. But he also testified that can be involuntarily done by Ryan's own self. This is a picture of Karina that was taken by law enforcement, and you can see you have them in your evidence. There's no blood on her, aside from where she had contact with Ryan by being on his lap. We know that Houston must have probably had blood on him because he's got it on his shoes. And enough that there were also droplets on the steps. So there was enough blood on him that not only is he leaving a shoe print, he's leaving drops. Just running through the remaining witnesses that we have and what we learned. We learned that Houston attempted to give the police the wrong gun in 2023. We know that the police find shoes matching the bloody shoe prints at the scene at Houston Danker's house. And we know Houston had the murder weapon. So as in the opening, Houston Danker did this, and we know it. Special Agent Holly Witt. She does a lot of work with the cell phone tower data. We know that Houston is driving by Karina's house while Karina's not even there. We know that he's lingering around her house for a span of minutes. We have nothing to suggest that they saw each other. There's perhaps been some confusion about whether both of them have Snapchat activity happening while he's near her house. We submit to you that the slide showed that Karina had Snapchat activity, or at least geolocations updating at that time. But Houston did not. Houston's only data points were at his house, and I believe there were only a couple of them for his geolocation updating. So what is he doing lingering around this house? He could be planning his attack. He could be checking whether a door is unlocked. Also, begs the question, was he stalking her house other days? Was this a regular occurrence? Holly Witt would be able to figure that out. We heard from Karina. You are going to have to decide her credibility. She got up here and she sat and she told you what happened. She sat through the state rubbing her nose in what she had said. She did it. She told you what she knows. And she would submit to you, she attempted to do her very best to, if she said something wrong, make a correction and correct herself. Her testimony does make sense. She does give information to the police. Not all of the information, but she does give them information. She tried to get to the gun safe because somebody was possibly there. An officer was able to open it with his thumbprint. I don't know how that happened either, I guess, how his thumbprint is able to do it, but it's unclear how the state is taking the position that she's saying things that only help her, but also saying that she's only saying things that don't make sense. Her testimony was also that she sees this clotting after the 911 call. But she's older. She couldn't have been manipulated by Houston because she's older. That's a very bare bones way to look at something, but it's certainly not impossible that a younger man could engage in this emotional affair with Karina and be participating in the way that we are submitting to you. Nobody's claiming Houston is a genius, but we are saying he's manipulative. People Houston's age commit crimes all the time, and very serious ones, without the aid of an older person. Well, she got upset on cross. It's a tough spot to be. It's a tough spot to be, being dragged through every single thing that you said, having bits and pieces of your phone information displayed for everyone to see, and you just being dragged through it over and over. But she lied for so long. She told us why. She felt like Houston was possibly setting her up. She felt like people were accusing her. She was scared nobody would believe her. It was wrong and not helpful to lie for so long. But she explained it to you. But the Snapchats. Again, it's incomplete information. It's obviously incomplete information. And that means data loss. Phone dumps are not gospel. There's a jump in the message ID sequence. I submit to you to use your common sense about what that could indicate. Tiffany Lord is so sure about how this biome works at 421, but again, there's no message, and she doesn't have an explanation for that. It seems like Tiffany Lord is able to explain things when they're helpful for the state, but doesn't understand them when they could be helpful to the defense. We don't have any Snapchat saying, please kill my husband. We don't have any Snapchat saying, please be quiet when you kill him. We don't have any Snapchats that the state seems to think she's busy making sure everybody is subdued. That she says, okay, he's asleep, everybody's asleep, time to come over. And then by the apparent timeline the state is establishing today, show up 50 minutes later, and we're still going to know that everybody's asleep. The state says that this had to have taken place at home with the children present because it would be weird if the kids were just not home that night. Sure, but why does it have to take place at home? If you want to kill your husband, there's a lot of places you could do it. It wouldn't involve putting your children through this. Also, if you plan to shoot your husband with your children home, you have to expect they could wake up. If you have kids, you know they wake up sometimes. I don't know what subdued means when the state says that, but there's certainly been no suggestion that anybody was drugged here. No testimony of that. And instruction number 10, that is about how you can use statements of Karina. You can use her statements that she made earlier, you can use the statements that she made here, and you can use them to decide if you believe her. You can disregard all of her testimony if you want to, but you don't have to. And the instruction says, do not disregard Karina Cooper's testimony if other evidence supports it, or if you believe it for any other reason. She got up here and she said that she was scared of Houston. And the state has tried to mishmash the timeline there. She wasn't scared of Houston until he actually killed her husband. She's still engaging in this ridiculous online emotional affair fantasy world until he actually does it and kills her husband. Then she's scared. And is that a ridiculous notion? Perhaps to some of you. But it was real to her. And she was scared. Whether it's because she thought that he was going to harm her, or whether it's because she thought she'd go down with this ship. Do not disregard her testimony if you believe it for any reason. Houston Danker. There's a wealth of evidence against Houston Danker being responsible. Houston Danker, we're going to say he's only so old, then he's probably reckless in his planning. He doesn't care if there's going to be a confrontation. He had made all these types of statements before. Why does he choose this night to do it? Nobody knows. He didn't testify. We know he's slinking around the house. We know he's familiar with the house. Cade told us Houston had come over and sat on the patio and drank. It's not like he needs a guide through the house. Presumably, Karina would have told Houston at some point that Ryan sleeps in the recliner chair, since there are messages of them fighting about Karina spending time with her own husband. Karina told you that they had been arguing earlier in the night. That could explain why this guy is driving by and slinking around, and it's because he's nuts. He was, up until the time he actually killed her husband, just a blowhard. Known for being a blowhard. Telling tall tales might have been the words used. So, when he is frequently saying to Karina, hey, by the way, I forget what her example was. There might be a bomb in the vehicle or something like that. Or, by the way, when I shoot him, make sure you pick up the shell casings on previous occasions in the past, and then nothing happens. She doesn't think anything is going to happen this time either. And when it does, then it's real. We talked about in jury selection, presuming somebody innocent, and that we're required to do so. We're required to look at things different in a courtroom than we might look at them every day or in our everyday lives. She is presumed innocent unless and until the state proves her guilty with evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. And it doesn't matter that she's sitting at this table with me. It doesn't matter that she was arrested. What matters is the evidence. Beyond a reasonable doubt, you have an instruction explaining that to you as well. Like we talked about in jury selection, it is not a gut feeling. It is not a snap judgment. It is not even, I'm pretty sure. Benjamin Franklin said, "It is better that 100 guilty persons should escape than one innocent person should suffer." And that's what we mean when we say beyond a reasonable doubt. We want jurors to be firmly convinced of somebody's guilt before they make that decision. If there's any part of you that is feeling doubt, reasonable doubt, don't convict her, even if you're pretty sure, because that's not firmly convinced. Aiding and abetting. State's case is just words. There's no proof that she lifted a finger to help Houston. The state makes assertions about the things that she probably or could have done to help Houston, but there is no affirmative evidence of that. We do not convict people of the most gravest of crimes based on thoughts or words. It doesn't matter if she sometimes had made statements about wanting a rogue semi-accident, which, I would point out, Tiffany Lord conveniently leaves out of her her PowerPoint, the very next statement being, "I have dark and twisted minds sometimes, divorce me." Cherry-picking evidence is misleading. And it's okay if you think you wanted to see all of it. You weren't given all of it. Houston Danker on this evening went rogue, and he actually did it. The aiding and abetting instruction tells you that her mere knowledge of the crime is not enough. The fact that she knew, or had every reason to believe he actually went through with it this time, and didn't tell the police that doesn't make her guilty. The bottom line here is that no one ran off into the mountains. Karina did not blow through the insurance money. We can sit there and quibble over how much she spent on this and how much she spent on that. It had been a couple of years. She's not making any income from her job. She's got 3 children that she's paying for, presumably rent places. You're going to go through some money. Nobody testified that she went and got a designer bag or took a lavish trip or started attending the spa every couple weeks. Nobody said that. Nobody testified to any indication of a continued relationship between Karina and Houston. So if this was their grand plan, to kill Ryan, get him out of the way, and ride off into the sunset, why does it end? It ends because it became real and he actually killed her husband. Karina doesn't have blood on her legs and feet she would have had to have. No one has testified or even hinted at the fact that she was a bad mother. I submit to you that is important because no mother would do this with their children home. No good mother. There were 100 other ways that this could have gone down if it was planned and meant to happen by Karina Cooper. She never would have done that with her children home. She never would have put them in a situation where her son is slipping in his dad's blood. She never. And nobody has said that she would have. She did not have any specific intent to kill her husband. She did engage in reckless behavior and talking to Houston and not cutting it off and having all these conversations. It was reckless. But she didn't have any intent to kill him or for him to actually wind up dead. She wasn't even actually going to leave him. She's getting attention from some knucklehead on Snapchat, and she likes it. And she's living in a fantasy and a dream world until he does it. This decision you're about to make is a decision like no other.
Judge, I'm going to object. May we approach? You may.
This is a decision like no other that you will make. When you buy a car, for example, you decide you don't like the car, you can sell it. Even the decision to get married, the decision to do lots of things in your life can be changed down the road. The decision of whether or not the state has proven somebody guilty of murder with evidence beyond a reasonable doubt, you cannot take back. So you better be sure. Please carefully consider all of the evidence that you heard in this case. I know we've heard the word Snapchat about 5,000 times, but there's a bigger picture here, and there's a woman sitting here accused of killing her husband. She didn't do it. She wouldn't do that. She would not do that to her children. She may be an idiot in her relationship with Houston, but she didn't participate in the murder of her husband. Please think it through. Find her not guilty. Thank you.